If you work in Catholic ministry, you know the mission matters, but some weeks the work itself gets in the way. So we're here to help you reclaim time for discipleship. This is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast. I'm John Kahns. Let's get into it. Today we're joined by Madeline Stockman. She's a ministry consultant for Evangelical Catholic. Madeline, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, John. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So Madeline is with Evangelical Catholic. Evangelical Catholic is coming to my parish, and I get to be a part of kind of the onboarding and getting it implemented in the parish and helping other people to grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ and really build a sustainable culture of evangelization and discipleship. And in the onboarding process, there was a ministry consultation that I got to have with Madeline, and that's the first time we chatted. And honestly, she asked some questions that even helped me to see the parish more clearly, my own parish. Simple questions, but they revealed a lot. And so today I want to kind of unpack that process. I want to invite all of our listeners into that process of uncovering God's vision for our parish. So Madeline, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I just want to give you a moment. I'm just getting to know you, but I want you to have an opportunity just to tell our listeners who you are and what you do with Evangelical Catholic.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John, for having me. So I would say that first and foremost in my identity is I'm a daughter of God. I am here and I came into this role working with priests, working with ministry professionals as an outpouring of my own prayer life, as an outpouring of my own relationship with Jesus as I grew in understanding who I was by understanding who Jesus was. I worked for many years simply as a parish volunteer, and I would show up to put the chairs away, and I would help out with the women's ministry, and I would bake cookies for the thing that needed to be done. And when my priest, asked my husband and I to volunteer for this discipleship making thing, mentoring, whatnot, I said, "Okay, Father, if that's what you want me to do, I'm going to trust that you know me better in this situation." And from that point on, that was in about 2018, 2019, that really began a shift in my spiritual life. And I found the Lord calling me deeply into a place of more professional ministry, which I had not planned on. I did not think that was going to be in my future. I just thought I was going to be a mom, living the mom dream. And the Lord has really brought me, day by day into a place where He wanted me to share with priests, where He wanted me to share with those who are volunteering, those who are working hard in parish life, and understanding what is evangelization, what is discipleship, what does it look like to live out every single day as a follower of Jesus, as that student, right? As that's what disciple means, a student. How do you live as a student? But then how do you train students? Who are the tutors and the teachers? And so I'm excited to talk with you, John, about just supporting ministry professionals across the board.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that call into perceiving that call into professional ministry, because I do think that pathway where you go from volunteer to, oh, the priest sees something there is pretty common, or, at least like I know even for my mom, 30 plus years ago, she was a volunteer and I think teaching a religious ed class. And then the priest said, "Hey, this seems to be more than just a hobby for you. Maybe step into this role." And then they step into it and they realize, maybe where some of the gaps are and stuff in their knowledge or training or whatever. But talk a little about that call, because it should be a call. Like, it's, yes, an invitation from the priest, but then an actual discernment of, am I called to this? And I think that that's a place where people who've been in ministry for a number of years find themselves going like, should I still be here? Should I not be? Was I following a career path, or was I called into this? So I pull that apart a little bit.
Yeah. Wow, John, I haven't thought about that in some time, but what's coming to mind is I don't know how I got it, but someone gave me a book copy of Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium, The Joy of the Gospel. And this was one of the first things that Pope Francis wrote in his pontificate. And don't try to print it off from the Vatican website. It's quite long. Get
It's
the book.
sturdy. Yeah.
It's sturdy. Exactly. Don't print it. And as I was reading through Evangelical, just it affected me so deeply as I could see that even from the very top of our church, even our Pope recognized that there were crunchy places in our parishes, that there were places that, you know, it wasn't working out smoothly. And I just felt very seen and very known because oftentimes I experienced at the local level that there would sometimes be a disconnect between those of us who were volunteers and maybe the parish or the diocesan leadership. So when I was reading Evangelical and recognizing, the Pope sees me. It's not even that he just sees ministry professionals or that he has just, an overview bird's eye vision, but I felt personally seen and known by the Pope, which I didn't expect when I was reading that. And I think my personal copy is highlighted and dog-eared and notes in the margins as he talks about developing like a missionary spirit to go and serve each person. And I think that was really important in my discernment of kind of transitioning from volunteer to ministry professional. I didn't have a undergraduate degree in theology. My undergraduate degree is in cartography and city planning. And I'm a convert. When I began reading this and I felt the call, I felt like so many, I was unqualified. I felt, gosh, Lord, I'm just a baby Catholic still in so many ways. I don't even understand how, multiple parishes work. I've only been in one setting, or, when we moved, then I was in a second setting, but I felt like the Lord was bringing me along truly in baby steps. And I would say the affirmations of good friends really helped as well. Those who also were in ministry who would say, just Madeline, you're good at this. And mentors, those who were much older than me. I had a mentor. Her name was Linda, and my husband was in the army, and her husband had been in the military about 17 years longer than my husband had been. And Linda really took me under her wing as a mentee, as a military spouse to military spouse, but she was a deeply faithful Catholic woman. And she encouraged me to step into places of leadership, even though I was young and even though I was green.
So something you said in that, first of all, cartography, I love that because I do think there's a lot of
I'm
practical
super nerdy.
application. No, absolutely. There's a lot of real practical application. The approach of assessing and then building a map, right? Building the map, building
Mhm.
out and doing the planning, like building the plan and then executing on it. There's a real analogy there for why this kind of ministry coaching, in a sense, fits your personality, because you already have that. Like, let's see where we're going, let's see what the reality is, and what are the
Mhm.
things that need to happen between here and there, where we are and where we want to be. I think there's a lot of real practical application. When you write the book on that, I want to read it.
All right, I'll let you know.
So you talked about this kind of culture of missionary discipleship, right? That you perceived out of this missionary culture from Pope Francis's book. And I think that that's what you're still living out here in Evangelical Catholic, and what you're talking about when you look at building sustainable cultures of discipleship. And so what makes that, like, a culture of discipleship sustainable? How is that different from just starting another program?
So I would say one of the main characteristics that makes a culture change, a culture of discipleship, is that your lay people have ownership, that they are empowered to go and do the thing. That then when they feel the call from the Holy Spirit, they know that they can just answer that. They can move forward. And it changes the parish from a place where they go to be just receivers only And many people have an experience, and the best of us can fall into this, where we are almost like audience members at Mass, or we're almost like audience members at the conference, especially if we've been doing ministry for a long time, right? It's so common for us to go to an event or a conference and, skip half the talk because we're going to go get something ready, or, not fully participate in. This is our 8th conference we've attended, right? Not let that really touch our hearts, but we're like audience members in so many ways. And the culture shift really happens when people are coming to Mass, or they're coming to, adoration, or they're coming to the parish for a parish event. And it's more so that that's fueling them to go out into their own lives to do the thing, right? To proclaim the gospel in large and small ways. And so the ownership piece is really huge to this culture. Do the lay faithful have a sense that they can just go and, call their neighbor? Or is there a sense of, gosh, if I want to get involved, then I have to do it through the parish. I better get approval. I'm not sure if I'm qualified. I'm not a counselor. Well, I've never done anything like this. Well, the director of discipleship, he'll know what to do. And I'll just tell him if he needs me, I'm here. And then I'll just wait.
I think you plucked a string in everybody's heart just there.
Yeah, well, we've all been there, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is the transition people want, where people go. Sometimes you have a parish and it's really designing all of its programming to become what it wants to be, which is a locus for like the social component of their parishioners' lives. And what you're saying is that that's actually not the goal, right? Yes, come to the parish. Yes, be fed, but then go out and go do the work, right? That's a transition. So the reason that I really wanted to have a conversation with you on the podcast is that initial conversation we had, and you had asked questions that helped me, like I said, see my parish more clearly. I want walk through then how these questions that you're asking in these ministry assessment interviews, why these matter before a parish begins to make that change to its culture that you just described.
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that I have seen throughout all the different ministries and parishes that I work with is that change doesn't happen through wishes and dreams. It happens through reality. It happens through the actual circumstances in which exist. And this is true for each one of us, right? Most of the time, our personal call is to our own actual families, our own actual neighborhoods, the people in our lives who we can put names and faces to. I always tell people, if you are saying the words they and them too often, these are probably people who you don't actually have real influence over. Who do you actually know? Who would you run into a grocery store and recognize? Those are the people who you have real influence over. And so this is the reality, and parishes have to recognize what is the reality in which they currently exist, not just, oh, I wish I could be like some other they, them type of parish, but what is the reality? So that's really where the basis of these questions start. And they are more qualitative in nature than quantitative. And when I am meeting with someone, this helps me to understand not just the reality of what exists, in physical paper, but what exists in their mind. What is their perception of their parish? What's their perception of the people? And this helps me understand what the current situation is, but also clues me into, what's been going on in the past 5 or 6 years. Was there pastor turnover? Was there pain that people are still healing from? In terms of culture change, you don't want to shock people's systems. Sometimes that's helpful a little bit, but you want to address what is currently there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said that when you're looking to transform your parish through your work, you have to have a clear idea of where you're going and why, but that has to be stemming from a real assessment of where you are currently. And you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can give some examples of the questions that you find really helpful for assessing the parish, and with, like, in the context of that, these 2, 3, 4 questions or whatever, what are you looking for and why you ask that question? Would you be willing to go through a handful of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So some folks might be familiar with what's commonly called a SWOT analysis. So my questions start there. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And what are the threats? And strengths and weaknesses, this oftentimes is just priming the pump, getting people to think about, okay, what is my parish really good at? And I like starting with that because frankly, people enjoy complaining and their list of complaints usually comes very readily to mind. And not often are they, ruminating throughout their days on how great their parish is and all of the strengths that really are there. So I like to start with that. And sometimes people have to just sort of sit and think about it. They may have never articulated this before. Uh, and what I am looking for there is, how is this person interacting with their own parish? Is there love there? One of the things that I love to hear in that is when they say, it's the people. Our greatest strength is our people. And that to me is a great indicator from the get-go of just health.
I can
If
imagine
what
if
comes to mind is our strength is us, the people.
I can imagine if they said our greatest threat is the people. That might set off some warning bells for you a little
Yeah,
bit.
exactly. Yeah, so after strengths and weaknesses, then come the what are the opportunities and what are the threats. And I can learn a lot about a parish because this is a little bit more speculative, and the opportunities, again, people often, this brings them to a place of hope where they're thinking ahead. Oftentimes I get to hear about some of the natural charisms of the parish when it comes to opportunities. Some parishes, I'm hearing from people, you know what, our finances are in a really good place and we have strong community and we're not really participating in any corporal works of mercy. And we really could be. We have good people who could do that, but we don't have a prison ministry. We don't have something for the homeless, but we are in a place where we could. And that hope starts to spring forward, right? In terms of threats, I often encourage them, think of it like a weather forecast, right? These are the clouds on the horizon. Maybe the storm will dump a bunch of rain on you, but maybe the storm will pass by and it won't happen. And to your point earlier, John, oftentimes the most concerning threats that I see is if they're saying, well, there's a lot of interpersonal drama here.
Mm.
People, you know, ignore each other or they fight with one another, or it's, gosh, don't come to our parish council meetings. It's a wreck. Those are those are major threats.
So in a real way, though, then sometimes the people are the biggest threat, or
It's
at least
very
the
true.
the
Sometimes it
culture,
is.
the culture that exists among the
Mhm.
people. Actually, you went a different direction than I expect. I thought you were going to say the biggest threat is often, well, there's a non-denominational church down the road, and a lot of our kids are going to their youth group. I thought that was
This
going to be
comes
it.
up, but this actually is not that concerning to me because again, it puts them in what the threat is there that I see is they are in a place of comparison.
Mm.
And when they're in a place of comparison, they are blinded to their own joys, their own charisms, the own ways in which their parish can thrive and grow. Because if all they see is the other big non-denominational church and look at what they're doing, well, could we be copying them? Why don't we have greeters in our parking lot, right? What's that old saying? Comparison is the thief of joy. And
Amen,
it's so
amen.
hard to develop your own vision, your own long-term plan for your parish if you're trapped by fear.
And so that to me really unveils what goes wrong then when we try to come up with some initiative for parish renewal, but we haven't taken the time then to really assess where we're at in the parish and what's at the root of our problems. And that's why, now we have not even greeters in the parking lot, but at the front door who's and that's our main hospitality outreach, is people who are going to open the door for you and wave at you while you walk in, right? And that's
Mhm.
how we end up with sometimes what's a band-aid over a great gaping wound, as opposed to a real fix for something more internal that needs to be addressed. So I love that you're kind of pulling that apart for us. So as you're doing this, then I guess I'm curious then how you distinguish between those surface level problems and the deeper pattern. Like how do you encourage them to, because you can say like, well, I hear you say this. Do you just say, but I think this is what's at the center of it? Or how do you kind of walk them through then to begin to assess, okay, this is the problem we see. We've got some interpersonal conflicts. We're comparing ourselves to other churches down the road. How do you help them then kind of dig a little deeper into those patterns that emerge?
hmm So, one of the questions that we ask that sometimes surprises people is I'll ask just very generically, what is the communication like in the parish? Do people communicate well? And this gives me a huge amount of information as to those patterns. And from what they've identified as weaknesses or what they're seeing as threats, are those things, bobbing along the top? Or are those like fishing lines that are tied to deeper problems down below? And a lot of it comes down to the answers that I hear back from people regarding the communication piece. John, sometimes people will put their heads down and be like, we don't communicate. We don't talk to each other. We do our own thing and we get the job done mostly, but our spiritual lives are private. We don't really know where we're going. You know, sometimes we have a staff meeting. Sometimes Father, he'll do annual check-ins with us sometimes, but we don't really talk. We don't really communicate. That to me shows, okay, this is a problem that is existing at great depth. Versus if they say something like, we have a well-oiled staff here. And I always know what Susan is doing. Susan has a totally different job than me, but we enjoy working together when the time comes. And we have a sense of where Father is going. And there's a sense here that we're all in the same boat and we're paddling our oars in the same direction. And that communication piece tells me a lot about, are these patterns of problems or are these just bobbing along the surface?
Yeah, and I can imagine the more people you talk to, the more person opinions you get about every little individual thing. So how do you sift through that, and how do you boil that down and help without trying to fix every individual concern? Because you're going to have at least one personnel issue that somebody brings up, but there's going to be 15 personality conflicts. So how do you
Yeah.
like fix this without trying to fix every individual concern in person?
Well, John, a lot of that, I will tell you again, you mentioned earlier, sometimes we go after something that is like a band-aid when really it's something that needs a long term, needs some, a longer hospital stay. Doesn't need a band-aid. It needs an IV drip. And oftentimes before we can implement large changes at the parish, Father needs to be a good father. He needs to bring forward those qualities that every dad has to bring leadership to his family, to bring vision to his family, and to bring love to the family, to discipline when discipline is required, to bring affirmation and joy. This is one thing that I hear sometimes when with all of those different personalities of people who I talk to. Some people feel like, oh, I can talk to Father anytime that I want to. Other folks may feel like, I don't know, I'm on the outs with Father. I don't really know if I could, approach him with an idea that I had. And so a lot of it comes down to the priest really embracing his qualities of fatherhood. And this is one thing that I like to spend time with after these interviews and after spending time with people is just giving the priest some real data. Sometimes these are very candid conversations, but I often will talk to him about, Father, how do you feel about your flock? Where is your heart for them? Because a lot of this is going to start with Father.
Yeah, that, and you had mentioned that earlier about trying to assess whether there's actually, we just did an episode of this on the podcast, was, do you actually love your parishioners? Because you and I have both sat in meetings with parish professionals, and all they're doing is complaining about how terrible their people are.
Yeah, it's
And
tough. It's very tough.
it breaks your heart because they're here because they love them, but they've allowed periphery things or surface level things or shallow things to allow the devil to slowly steal their love away from them, and so much
Mhm.
of it's getting I don't know, reinvited invited back into that
In,
love that they
yeah,
had at first.
into the family, right?
Yeah,
Being a member of the family.
yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you with our pastors too, because I had a pastor who was retiring, and I worked on the staff. And near the end, there was a deacon that worked with him or worked on the staff as well. And he said, Father, you must, as you're getting towards retirement, you must kind of feel like it must be kind of hard. You feel like you're leaving your children. And the priest he just laughed. He said, no, I don't have any kids. If I wanted kids, I would have got married. And I,
Gosh.
I,
Oh
I
my
would,
gosh, my heart.
it was like a knife in
My
my
heart.
heart. Cause I was like, you're my father. We call you father.
Yeah.
And I just think a priest who has rejected his fatherhood, has rejected his masculinity, he's rejected his leadership, he's abdicated his throne as priest, prophet, and king. Like
John,
that's
that word abdicate, that's a word that I will use often with priests. And I'll remind them, I'll say, Father, you're not leading by consensus.
mm,
Okay? Do not abdicate your role as a father. Do not just try to make everybody happy. And this is priests sometimes will want to have too many interviews. This is not a when I am doing these interviews to assess, where are we going with discipleship? What kind of a vision can we make? It's different than a lot of the synodal processes that dioceses are implementing right now. And so sometimes I'll want to make sure that, Father or those who I'm interviewing know that is that I'm not here to gather like every single opinion that exists in the parish. I'm here to understand what is life like in the parish. Let's do some diagnosing of, what is the reality here? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? How are you actually communicating? Do you have an ability to change? And then I want to go to the leader. I want to go to the father and say, Father, this is what I'm hearing from your children, and and listen to his voice of authority and encourage that voice of authority and allow him a place to recognize he has to lead from this place of authority. He does not need to appease 100 voices in the parish. He needs to listen enough to understand his people, and then he has to lead from a place where he loves them, but truly guiding them.
yeah. I worked with a parish, and one of the feedbacks I got, or as you lead up to the conversation, is our pastor he's not a strong leader. He just isn't, which is fair. I mean, they're not trained to be leaders. They're trained to be priests, right? They're not trained to
Right.
be CEOs. And I understand all that. But one of the biggest unlocks that we had was in my leadership alignment workshop. And we sit down, and I got the community to start naming what the community, or the team to start naming what the community's greatest poverty is. And then
Mm,
you really turn to your pastor and say, okay, I know when you're praying and you're looking at your flock, there's something that is on your heart for them. What is our response to this greatest poverty? And when you can name that, and when they do name that, it unlocks something spiritually that everybody else goes, yes. And we want to follow that, Father. So lead us. It unlocks that dynamic, that fatherhood, that spiritual fatherhood. And yeah, I love that you're kind of naming that for us. So I'm wondering, okay, so what happens for you when the different groups describe the parish in very different ways, right? You might have one group that's like, oh man, our parish is so inviting, and like you show up, and like hospitality is like our big thing. We want everyone to feel welcome. But then you've got someone else is like, I've been here for 10 years and no one's ever said hi to me. How do
yeah,
you walk
John,
that
this
line?
is How do I walk that line? Well, again, this goes into what I mentioned earlier, that is the reality for those people,
Mm.
right? And that's important to bring to Father. That's important to bring to the leadership, to say, maybe we are a very hospitable place, and maybe there are cliques here. Both of those things can be true. Maybe there is maybe we have subcultures. We have different people going different directions. And to the point about fatherhood, right, this happens in families all the time. Brothers and sisters don't always get along.
This is what happened. No, this is what happened.
Exactly, right? Like, well, who said this and who said that and who said this and who said what? And even as a parent, right, you're trying to deduce, okay, what really happened here? But at the same time, you still have to recognize that your son is crying, and your daughter is, sitting there with, a look on her face, and you have to parent both of them. You have to parent both of them,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So just in the same way, those when I receive information about a parish that seems to be in conflict, recognizing, okay, that this is the reality for these people, even if that's just perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And even then, man, that fatherhood analogy is so important for our pastors. We could unpack that. That's not the purpose of this podcast, but
I
maybe we
know.
should do another one. So, so once you've gathered all this data and you've talked to parishioners, you've talked to parish staff members, you've talked to the pastor. Once you've gathered all this information for helping a parish understand its current reality, what are the questions? What's the process to help them discern and name the direction, the vision, where God is leading them?
Yeah. So the next part of the process is, sometimes it just takes a little bit of time. It can be difficult to get to those, okay, and now here's where our vision. Sometimes it's not clear. And I want to bring up the point of, sometimes there's very real pain.
Mm.
Sometimes there's hurt. And I would say 9 times out of 10, what has to happen before the trajectory can be set and we're off to the races is you have to clear spiritual ground with prayer. And I know we often say, like, oh, pray all the time, right? But prayer is a real work, and prayer matters, and prayer does something to us, right? And we see this in scripture where the Lord commends the persistent widow, right? Who prays constantly again and again and again. And this does something for us. There's something that we need in prayer to offer to this. And so I would say, so frequently, before a vision can be set, there has to be a period of time where prayer is a major priority for the staff and for Father. I would say it's very rare that I come into a ministry and they have regular staff prayer or a regular adoration hour, which they all attend together. 9 times out of 10, their spiritual lives are hidden even from one another. And the two people in the office who don't quite get along, they may have never actually had a spiritual conversation. It may have only been about work, even though we're in a church, even though everything that we're doing, right, is bathed in prayer and every meeting begins and ends in prayer. They may have never actually entered into prayer truly, honestly in their heart. And so, very frequently, I am coaching Father into, Father, you need to have every single week 1 hour of staff prayer. Oh, I don't have the time for that. You do. You do.
I do think that there's something there because I believe that our pastors would be shocked and amazed at how so many of their personality conflicts and personnel issues would be solved if they would intentionally invite their entire staff into a process of discipleship.
Yes.
The other thing it would do is for the pastor, give them an actual group they're discipling.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
how good that would be for their own souls, their own like joy, sense of success at work, sense of momentum, if they were intentionally discipling their staff and not just like, are we together, but we talk about professional development, and I don't mean professional development, but yeah, if you're going to work for the church, I have expectations for how you're going to live your life. And I think that's fair. That's what Jesus did, right? So invite them into intentional conversations through which they are both opting into this thing fully, and you are with them in it too. And you're leading them directionally towards Jesus, obviously. But as we're all leading towards Jesus, we're also converging on one point together.
Exactly.
So it begins to solve some
Exactly.
of those issues.
Very much so. So much of the interpersonal things, the places where folks feel stagnant or stuck, those begin to clear in a way that only prayer and petition to the Holy Spirit will clear it.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, these there's nothing that you could make a goal about to improve this. Sometimes this is not something that you could immediately measure. That spiritual ground has to be cleared.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you said that. How would you encourage a pastor to begin doing that? Like, I know this is deviating from what the things we were talking about. How would you encourage a pastor to start doing that?
I would say the most important thing is that it has to be mandatory. If this is, well, anyone who wants to come to this can, but I don't want to, force you or make anybody do something they don't want to. No, sometimes as a parent, things are mandatory, right? You probably know as a parent, there are things regarding prayer that just are required, right? We are praying before dinner. This is not optional. This is mandatory. We are praying before we go to bed. This is not optional. This is mandatory. I don't care if you don't feel like it. We're doing it. And so the first thing is whatever gets implemented with prayer for the staff, Father has to make it mandatory for all staff. Even if, maybe he has staff members that aren't even Catholic. Well, they took a job at a Catholic parish or at a Catholic ministry. And so they should be expected to have movement in their own spiritual life in some way, right? On a practical level, if if it if there's good access for everyone on the staff to the chapel, it's an hour of staff prayer in the chapel. If people are in, a variety of locations, and this is something I hear often, especially as there are more and more parish clusters or pastorates that are forming in different dioceses, it's, well, I have some staff in one building and some staff in another building. Father, get on Zoom. Can you make a WhatsApp video group? Right? We're on a podcast right now, John. I have never met you in real life. This is not negatively impacting our conversation, right? So sometimes, yeah, okay, if everyone is in different locations, set it up as a Zoom, a recurring meeting that happens every week, right? And then even if someone is working from home or people are traveling, they can come in together to pray. Maybe Father wants to lead it every single week, or you could rotate through staff members who is going to lead that. And it, regardless of your staff size, it's very easy to set that up for like a whole year. Just make a calendar, right? And maybe ahead of time, okay, I'm going to leave I'm in charge of leading staff prayer 4 times this year. It gives people again that sense of ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, one of the things that can do is not everybody likes Father's style, and that's fair. Even if you're being discipled by him, you might not like his
Yeah.
style, but you do work at the parish and you do have to represent his vision. And so you need to learn and grow in that. That said, if you're leading prayer every once in a while, you can probably deviate from that, and that's okay. Like, you do it in your style. What I'm hearing from you is there's not a one size fits all solution to this, but there is a need to concretely do something different and intentional.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've been talking a little bit about vision, and you kind of identify like this is the direction we're going. How do you make that clear enough to then shape real decisions around the vision?
Well, first of all, I would say don't be afraid of getting a little bit messy. Get everybody in a room together. Get a whiteboard. Get a flip chart. There's something about being incarnational when it comes time to set forth the pace, the who we are. We have a good sense of the reality. We've cleared the spiritual ground. Okay, let's start running. And where are we running to? I highly encourage that to be, all staff members in the room, fathers leading. Sometimes we at the Evangelical Catholic, this is a large part of what we do when we come on site, is we'll facilitate this goal setting session. And the the mess is part of the beauty. I often find that when you say yes to the Holy Spirit, he takes you places and you don't exactly know where you're going until suddenly you've arrived. And I find that goal setting can be like this, and setting a vision can be like this, where there's a lot of drafts and you hear the voices in the room and like what is coming forward. And again, if you have cleared that spiritual ground with prayer for some time before you get to this can be very fruitful, right? People have healed from things that they need to heal from. People feel like Father is in a place where he is going to lead them well and provide that fatherly care for affirmation and for discipline and for understanding the things that they want to bring to the table, and that he's going to listen to them well, right? And so just start writing things down. Sometimes 5 years can feel really intimidating if you have a group of ministry professionals in the room. They haven't really done something like this before. So sometimes just starting with 1 year. Where do we want to be 1 year from now? And I'm not talking about the liturgical calendar, right? That's always going to be your default for your for your catechist and your faith formation is if you say, well, where do you want to be from when now? Their whole mind operates by that liturgical calendar. It's like, no, no. What kind of people do we want to be? Where do we want our hospitality to be? Where do we want our sacramental life to be? One of the goals that I often encourage Father to make if it's not happening is regarding adoration hours. And I had one priest who decided that time in adoration was going to be a major indicator that where he could see his flock growing in their spiritual lives. And out of one of these goal setting meetings, they decided together as a group, we are going to start posting every week in the bulletin a live tracker of adoration hours. And this was, I had never heard of that or seen that before. And after a few months, their adoration chapel started filling up. And this was something that they came together as a group. And they decided that this wasn't like, where are we going to be in 10 years? Or, that was it was too far away for them to think about. But Father could think about, I want the adoration. This was a solid goal, right? It was, when we talk about SMART goals, it was, he had a timeline on it. It was measurable, it was trackable. People could see it. There was natural accountability built into that. And sure enough, the adoration chapel started filling up.
Yeah, the solutions are often it shows that the thing you give your attention to, it's the thing that receives your energy, and
Yeah.
it's the thing that receives your time. If you're thinking about tracking adoration hours, it's going to pop into your homilies. It's going to pop into
Mm-hmm.
the little blurbs you do in the bulletin and all that stuff, and that does over time bear fruit. It's the same thing as having a clear vision statement and saying it over and over again. Like, yeah, you're the only one saying it until a year later when you hear people saying it back to you or discussing it, in conversation without realizing that they're bringing it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this enculturation of it. I could see how these parish vision statements, vision things, it could fall into just like really classic Catholic buzzwords like encounter. I think everybody goes, yeah, well, we're here to make disciples. So that's our goal, is to make more
Mm-hmm.
disciples. And so you had mentioned having like SMART goals, something very clearly defined, very concrete. An example being the adoration time hours. I love how granular that is, to think about how granular that particular thing is. But it also shows that we as a team, as a staff, when we pick something and we try to execute on it, we can have success.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. So oftentimes, what I also think is helpful, so that vision statement, that goal doesn't just then sit in a corner and collect dust. is it has to be refreshed regularly. So a rhythm of we come back together and we look at this and we hold each other accountable, right? So one thing that I find really helpful is when we're setting goals, each goal is assigned to someone. Each job is assigned to a person who's going to make it happen, who is going to answer, did this happen or did this not? And to create a rhythm of meeting, maybe that's quarterly, maybe that's every 6 months, where they say, we're going to come back, we're going to look at what we said last time, and very simply, did we do it or not? And, John and Susan and Maria and Carl are going to have to say, yes, it happened, or no, it didn't happen. And then just assess why, right? This isn't a place where, okay, and now we're dishing out punishments. But if we said we want to make sure that our ushers say hello to every new person, and then 3 months later, Carl says, no, we didn't do that. Well, why? And spend some time. Was this a reasonable thing to say? Maybe this was an absolutely unreasonable goal to have been made,
Well,
or
and
maybe something
maybe
got
it's
dropped.
maybe it's reasonable, but it's impossible to track. I mean,
Exactly.
those are the conversations that come out of real accountability conversations.
Exactly. And so one of the things that we do is we coach Father and the staff into some rhythms of accountability, meeting regularly. And accountability is not about a judgment of saying, well, this is, grounds for disciplinary action of some kind, but why did it happen or why did it not happen? And what are we going to do now? Right? It's okay to scrap a goal sometimes. Maybe you need to do something different. Maybe you need to address the target differently. So a pattern of reassessment. And this starts at a personal level. You mentioned earlier, the adoration hours for Father, that's something that's very granular. And one of the things that we coach everyone into having through our Reach More mission process is a rule of life. So that each individual person has sense of how am I living out my prayer life? How am I engaging in community? And how am I personally living out mission? And if you have staff and if you have key volunteers who are in their own personal life and in their own spiritual ways living out a rule of life, then when it comes time to work as a team, when it comes time to set vision for the staff, this goes very smoothly. This goes very well because they have personal rhythms that they have set up, right? Maybe they're addressing their own rule of life every 3 to 6 months. So it's going to feel very natural to implement this at the parish level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even think that's kind of a baseline for if you're going to do discipleship with your staff.
Yes.
Everybody bring your rule of life. I mean, yeah, don't put like your deepest mortal sins on there, but what are the things that you're working on that are leading you towards the kingdom to greater holiness? Are you fulfilling those or no? And how can we help you to become more holy? Like that's a awesome question to
Right.
work through as a staff to know now I've got these warriors beside me in the battle. That's a good and holy and righteous and beautiful thing.
Exactly. That sense of iron sharpens iron, right? So too one man sharpens another. Can we encourage one another to continue living out our own personal rules of life? If you hear a fellow ministry coworker in that prayer session mention, I haven't really prayed the rosary at home very much. My, spouse isn't Catholic and I've been really reticent to do something like that, but they just said that they were open to it. And so I want to start praying the rosary together, once a week as a family, but I'm nervous about implementing this. How much goodwill will come over the weeks of just simply saying, hey, I hope your rosary is going really well.
Yeah.
These ways of growing in relationship, of showing some vulnerability one with another and encouraging each other in our own personal spiritual lives, this translates directly into what is happening with parishes and developing discipleship across the whole community.
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you, this conversation has been awesome. I think there's so many gold nuggets here for people to kind of pick up and, rocks to turn over in their brain. But I can imagine for like the very practical pastor or somebody on a staff that's hearing all of this and they're hearing how robust this whole process is and how it really can lead to practical change, real substantial change, sustainable change. They might not be ready to like call you and try to bring evangelical Catholic in tomorrow, but they can begin these better conversations. What are 2 or 3 questions that you would want to leave them with that they could bring to a staff meeting if they want to start things percolating beyond just them listening to this episode? What are 2 or 3 questions they could kind of bring to the meeting to get these things percolating with their staff and maybe begin assessing where they are and naming where God might be leading them?
Absolutely. So I find that the best questions to begin with, even for those who are very practical minded, they have to be questions that get to the heart because otherwise you're only going to get surface level answers. So if we're going to start stirring this up, you can think about like the ocean, right? And how, here's my nerd side coming out, right? The ocean is renewed from the bottom up with this process of upwelling, where nutrients come up from the bottom and they renew the surface. So if you only ask surface level questions, you're not going to get the nutrients that you're looking for to start stirring this in your staff and in your community. So 2 questions that I really, or excuse me, 3 questions that I love that is going to get to their emotions and start stirring this. These are very simple questions. Number 1, what sucks the life out of you? Your staff will tell you very quickly, right? Second question, what gives you life? What gives them energy? As a pastor, you want to know that. What is making your people sluggish and slow? They're filled with drudgery, they hate this thing, right? Give them the freedom to really tell you the answer. And then what fills them with delight? What gives them energy? What fuels them? So what sucks the life out of you and what gives you life? You will get a lot there. The third question, what do you want to do more of? What do you want to do more of? These 3 questions, this is going to stir up a huge amount of nutrients. You're going to get a lot of information to just look at and ponder and pray with.
And I imagine what's going to come out of that, you do it regularly, cyclically, whatever it is, you're going to start realizing, oh, this person wants to do some of what's on her plate, and she wants to do some of what's on his plate. And maybe there's a way we can begin to work in our own zones of genius, of excellence, and maybe there's a reclassification of the positions a little bit like people get a job description when they're hired at a parish, and then 10 years later they're doing 15 other things. Like this is a great way
Exactly.
to begin sifting through some of that and really taking stock. Like you said, it all starts from understanding where we are, and those are great questions to do that. Well,
They're
Madeline,
not
this
they're not filled with buzzwords either, which your
yes,
Catholic ministry people are going to enjoy. There's no Catholic buzzwords in those questions.
I love it. I
A
love
little
it so much.
refreshing for them.
This has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect with you, Madeline, to learn more about Evangelical Catholic, all that jazz?
So evangelicalcatholic.org, just simply you can go to our website. There's quite a lot of information on there. We also have a YouTube channel. If you just search the Evangelical Catholic and you start seeing the color teal, you're in the right place.
All right. Sounds great. Well, everybody, I encourage you to reach out to Madeline. And as always, don't let this be just another good conversation, right? Parish renewal does not begin with another crowded calendar. It begins when you and I take responsibility for the people that God has already placed in our lives. If this episode named something that your parish needs to talk about, send it to your pastor, a staff member, or one serious Catholic who cares about renewal, and start that conversation this week. Thank you for listening to the Catholic Ministry Professionals podcast. And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.